Well, the annual World Economic Forum of global government and business leaders began in the small Swiss resort of Davos today. It ends on Friday. SABC Business anchor Frances Hurd is there, and we now cross live to her. Good afternoon, Frances. How are you coping with the snow?
Well, Nampu, it's actually okay. If you can see behind me, it's a beautiful day. The sun is out, but this comes after some of the heaviest snowfall in 20 years. And apparently the snow fall was about 2 meters thick. So what's happening now is the sun is out and the snow is just falling on people's heads as it melts. The roads are very squishy, and you realize that a lot of people spend a lot of their time here clearing snow. So not great for traffic, not great for the delegates who are in very slippery shoes. Some you can see are used to being here and they've got the proper snow boots. But you see a lot of people in very beautiful, stylish shoes trying to navigate the snow very, very carefully.
Now, the theme there is creating a shared future in a fractured world. What are some of the initiatives that you think will be spoken to in this endeavour?
Look, it's pretty crazy. So in the main conference centre, which is just a few meters away, what you have delegates in open fora. So you have about 6, 7 sessions going on at one time in some cases, talking about big issues. This is really the macro issues, the state of the world. They talk about artificial intelligence, global trade today. Then you also had the co-chairs introducing themselves. And this year it's quite interesting. The co-chairs of the World Economic Forum are all women. There are 6 of them, and one of them is the Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg, and she spoke about Me Too. She actually touched on the campaign against sexual abuse, and she said we need a Me Too as well to talk about corruption and illicit trade flows, and that was augmented by what Christine Lagarde was, the head of the IMF. She always plays a prominent role here, and she's one of the co-chairs. She also echoed what the head of this World Economic Forum is, the convener, Klaus Schwab, has said, that the world is picking up, economic growth is picking up, and this year is set to be a much better one. And we're in this sort of sweet spot. But the delegates here are saying we have to harness that to deal with things like inequality, to deal with all the plagues of the world, global warming, all the things that threaten to fracture the world. That's what the topic is. Like you said, fractured societies, refugee crises, a lot of these things linked to inequality and corruption. But it's hectic because so many topics are discussed at one.
Unfortunately, we've lost contact there with Frances. Hopefully we can pick her up a bit later. Oh, we have her back. Let's go back to her if we can. Okay, Frances, glad that we've got you back. Now, what big names there, what big innovators are there, and are you hoping to get some of them?
Everybody's here. Donald Trump is, of course, the US president, the most controversial delegate. He hasn't arrived yet, and a lot of people are saying he'll be a bit of a distraction. But heads of state, Narendra Modi from India opened the main session today, and they have an unprecedented number of heads of state. And from Africa, I believe we have 10. So we have Emerson Mnangagwa, who really is making a show of being here and wants to speak to investors. We always have Rwandan President Paul Kagame. He usually does well at these meetings. In a lot of the main fora, he highlights how well Rwanda is doing. Of course, we have Cyril Ramaphosa, our deputy president, and we'll speak to some of the ministers here. And tomorrow, I hope to bring you Bill Gates. He's giving us an interview, very concerned about malaria. He does a lot on global health, and he's here mainly to talk about malaria and a push in Central America to try and eradicate malaria over the next 2 years, which is very ambitious.
It's very interesting, Frances, that last year China was the centre of attention at Davos. I was there last year. And this year, China seems to have taken a sideline. And now, of course, the US and President Donald Trump are going to be at the forefront. What are delegates saying in the corridors? And what's the expectation of what he's going to say?
This is so interesting because China has been largely absent from these World Economic Forum meetings. But yesterday they came, last year rather, like you say, they came in force, sort of announcing China's arrival as part of the globalized world. You know, they were often seen as the alternative, but saying we can be here, we can be a leader in Asia and across the world. And many say there was a vacuum created by the US not being here. This year we have a complete opposite situation. The United States is going to be here. China not too visible. President Trump coming with a huge delegation that's much anticipated and, according to some, dreaded. We're speaking to a lot of people who are saying he's not welcome here. He represents the fractured societies and the antithesis, the opposition to dealing with global warming, one of the big things that the delegates are dealing with. And earlier I spoke to the head of UNI Global Trade Union, which is the umbrella body for COSATU, Trade Union Federation COSATU, and thousands of trade unions around the world representing millions of workers, essentially. Philip Jennings, the Secretary General, basically saying that Donald Trump is going to be the distractor-in-chief at this meeting. Let's listen to that interview earlier.
He'd be speaking on Friday, which is the kind of closing afternoon of the World Economic Forum. He's claiming he's here to talk about America first and the wonderful thing he's doing for the American working man and women. When I look at the realities of the Trump economic policies and their social policies, it's far from putting American workers first. And there's a number of reasons for this. His latest tax deal, which has filled him full of joy, essentially is 83% of these tax deductions are going to go to the top 1%.
You say he's exhibit A of the fractured world that all these delegates are going to be talking about.
Well, when we look at where the fractures are, our interest is at the social fractures. And if you look at the world's workforce today, we have 3.2 billion people in the world's workforce. And almost 1 in 2 of them are in what we call vulnerable, insecure work. That is to say, there's no certainty of pay, no proper contractual conditions. 1 in 3 workers in the world today are surviving on just a couple of dollars a day. So we have a world of work which is insecure, which is precarious, and doesn't give people the certainty of what their future livelihoods will look like. So we have this big fracture in terms of the labor market, which is not working in the main for people. Secondly, when we look at the wealth and income distribution, things are simply getting worse. We have not seen levels of inequality in wealth and income distribution of this degree for more than a century since what was called the Gilded Age. And when we look at where the money is going, the benefits of economic growth go to the top 10%, top 1%, and it's not, the idea, they tell us it's going to trickle down. Well, I tell you, the buckets are empty. There's nothing filling those buckets, and therefore we have levels of income distribution which are not sustainable, which feeds insecurity and precarity. In Africa, for example, 60 to 80% of the GDP country is a result of people in informal work. In Africa, 60% of the working population have insecure, low-paid work. So there's a massive fracture there.
But so let's look at South Africa in finality.
Yeah.
We have some of the best labor legislation in the world. Workers are very protected. We're always talking about decent work, but we have one of the highest unemployment rates. And people are saying, shouldn't we worry about getting business going, about getting those people into work, rather than protecting the people who have jobs?
You need to do both. By making people in work poorer and more insecure is not going to help the economic development of South Africa. It is clear that since the financial crisis had a dramatic impact on the country, and I think South Africa suffered the consequences of the financial crisis of 10 years ago, number one. Secondly, I hope that with the improvement in the economic situation in the world, which is being claimed here, will have a beneficial effect. Africa needs investment, you need infrastructure investment, and it's the business people have to invest. Africa is a wonderful destination for investment, for international investors. The economic growth which we see in Africa usually tends to beat world standards. The problem that you have of investment is not as a result of the fact that a union has a collective agreement with an employer. You are not going to improve the situation in Africa by taking those in work on the race to the bottom.